just because you have an understanding of the Bible in your head doesn't necessarily mean that you have Jesus in your heart.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, got appetite. Everlasting water, never get thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey.
You are listening to Chad Schaefer on Disputed Lands.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another interview in our series to raise money in our efforts to raise money for Josh and Christina Peck. This hour, I have two special guests. The first time they've ever been on Disputed Lands. I'd like you to welcome them. They are Paul McGuire and Troy Anderson. They are joining with us. But before we talk to them, thanks, guys, for joining us. Before we talk to them, as I'm doing every hour, I want you to know how you can donate to Josh and Christina. On the screen there and in the comments below, you can see the website, dailyrenegade.com. You can go to their website, click the donate button. We've not set a goal. You can donate as little or as much as you want. We've not set a cap, because if I set a cap, you guys would meet it and stop. We're not doing that. Give what you can. You can go there to donate. If you prefer to do it anonymously, which some people do, you can also go to their GoFundMe page. That will be in the description link below of this video. You could go there and give that way. We're encouraging people to go give directly to the Daily Renegade, to Josh directly. That way nobody else gets a cut of it. Everything you donate goes to them. We'll remind you again at the end of the program, but don't forget to do that. Go to dailyrenegade.com. With us to now, and in the middle of my screen, we have Paul McGuire. And then on the end there, opposite me, we have Troy Anderson. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, thank you, Chad.
It's good to have you. You know, reading up on your guys' material, between the two of you, I think somebody has a reading program for a couple of years. And that's reading something every week. You guys are very prolific author. I'm going to put your guys' websites here. I got them loaded. You can see them. There's one of them. There's going to be several. If you guys want to briefly tell us where your websites are and where they can find your information, you can go ahead and do that. Paul, we'll start with you.
Okay. People can follow my website at paulmcguire.us, paulmcguire.us, and McGuire is McGuire. So at paulmcguire.us, we have free videos, archives, free radio program, free conference speaking, hundreds of free articles, everything we possibly can, free resources for people to spread around. And then, because books cost money to print, we have a lot of books that I've written and that I've written with Troy Anderson. So they should check out the website. I think they'd enjoy it.
And you, Troy?
Yeah, so my main website is troyanderson.us. You can learn more about our bestsellers, The Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse, on there. And the second website's prophecyinvestigators.org. We've got over a dozen faith leaders and Bible prophecy experts and journalists that contribute articles. So those are the two main websites.
Well, that's excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just read your flyers here on the information for my audience, so people know who you are. You've mentioned a little bit of it, but we'll start with Paul's. Paul is an internationally recognized Bible prophecy expert and a regular commentator of Fox News, CNN, and the History Channel. He's the host of God TV international prophecy television show, Apocalypse in the End Times. He is an eschatology professor and each year speaks to the tens of thousands of people at prophecy conferences across the U.S. and elsewhere, I'm sure. You can find more at those links below. Troy Anderson is a Pulitzer Prize nominated investigative journalist, co-author along with Paul of the best-selling globalism expose, The Babylon Code. I do recommend getting that. Very intriguing information in there. And a former executive and editor of Charisma Magazine and Charisma Media. He's a former Los Angeles Daily News reporter and a regular guest on numerous television shows and programs. And podcasts and everywhere that you can find Paul. I'm sure you will find Troy's voice as well. But guys, in today's effort of raising money, we're going to talk about a book that's actually been out for about a year that people may not know about yet. At least some of my audience doesn't, I'm sure. It's called Trumpocalypse. That's a very grab your attention title with that. What's up with that title? And then I'll actually read the full title here. Trumpocalypse, the End Times President, a battle against the globalist elite, and a countdown to Armageddon. Very loaded. Why that title?
Well, we were having a meeting, Troy, myself, and our agent, and Brian, and we wanted a title that wouldn't be like a predictable. And we kind of scared some people away, thinking they thought it was a militant anti-Trump book, which it's not. But Trumpocalypse, it works. You don't know quite where we're coming from, and that gives us an opportunity to mix in like Bible prophecy with the deep state and all kinds of stuff that isn't in mainstream news media.
Troy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was the day after President Trump got elected. Paul called me. We were just stunned that he had gotten elected, and because the Babylon Code is an expose of globalism. And President Trump, several months before he got elected, had announced that Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo. So that was his campaign platform. And then he got elected. And so Paul called me, and we thought it was just something supernatural had occurred with his election. And so we set up a call for our agent. At the time, there was all these headlines in the Washington Post and the New York Times about the Trumpocalypse. And so our agent happened to see one of those titles, and he says, hey, why don't we call this second book in the series Trumpocalypse? So that's sort of the genesis of this book.
That's awesome. So we'll start then. We'll just jump right into it, and we'll just keep the same order there. So Trumpocalypse, I mean, it's a very evocative title. It's very, as you guys have just said, it seems in the mind of at least the world to be an adequate name, whether or not you're for him or against him. Either way, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of things that are going on daily. So what is the Trumpocalypse about? What does it entail? What are we going to read within these pages?
Well, Troy and I did very, very intensive research through his sources, through my sources that are quite extensive. And then I happen to have grown up in Jackson Heights, Queens, and the next subway stop over is where Donald Trump grew up. And so one of the things that we point out in the book is, yes, Donald Trump's neighborhood was affluent, but it wasn't like the billionaire neighborhoods in Manhattan. And what we do in Trumpocalypse, we're trying to be politically objective. We're trying not to be biased towards the left or biased towards the right. But we're simply trying to point out what we believe are the facts. So, for example, when all the psychologists analyzed Trump over TV and declared him, clinically ill with all these psychological problems, we exposed the fact that those problems are non-existent, and the people who developed that psychological theory did so for the purpose of destroying conservative candidates. So Trumpocalypse is very eerie in the sense that stuff that you'll read today in the book was actually written 2 years ago. And then how did we know what to write or on what circumstances? Because nobody knew what would have happened. And we were able, by God's grace, to predict it. And we believe predict further what's coming down the road.
Yeah, I'll let you answer that too, and then I'll maybe add another question towards that. So, Troy, what would be your thoughts on what grabbed you when you were thinking about what should go into this book? What was the first things that came to your mind about what needed to be there from your research?
Well, yeah, so I at that time I'd already been doing a couple of years of interviews with all kinds of faith leaders and actually some generals and intelligence officials and experts in geopolitics and economics and that kind of thing. And so the first couple of chapters sort of explore, how does President Trump's election fit into unfolding end time events? I think there's sort of a general consensus now that we are likely in the end times. For the Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse, I interviewed probably about 130, 140 different people, everybody from Billy Graham and Tim LaHaye to sort of a who's who of, Bible prophecy experts and faith leaders. But then also, experts at Princeton and Harvard, Noam Chomsky, and experts in, different fields. And there's sort of on the Christian side, there's this overwhelming consensus that yes, we're in the biblical end times. Billy Graham, told me that signs of the end of the age are converging for the first time since Jesus made those predictions. But then even, experts like Noam Chomsky and these professors at these existential risk institutes at Oxford and Princeton, they believe we're approaching the end of human civilization. So there's sort of this overwhelming consensus on both sides that humanity's in trouble and that we're in this very dangerous time in history. So the first few chapters sort of explore that, but then we also go into, the deep state. We have a chapter called, I think it's called Deep State Explosion or a Cult, Deep State and the Occult or something like that. And then we have, the Illuminati secret plan. We have a chapter on the Third Temple and President Trump and exploring all that. And we have a chapter on North Korea before that was all unfolding. And so it just sort of seemed like the hand of God sort of guided us as we wrote this book, and then all this stuff started happening. It was rather, and a whole bunch of people have, written comments on Amazon and Goodreads and Barnes and Noble, saying that they thought that was, it was uncanny the way that these things have all unfolded.
Well, there's a lot of people, I would count myself among them, who believe that Trump actually, though not a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination, and in many ways a flawed person, there are many people like myself who feel like he gave us a pause and a time out when it comes to the globalist march. A lot of the things that we've seen unfold over the last 2 years alone, we've been exposed to a number of things that occurred. I believe we would have never even known about or heard about or would have been brought to the forefront. They would have been swept under the rug. And you guys had mentioned that he seemed to be one of the first things he did was talking about Americanism and an America, not elitism, but America first. And this really flied in the face of the globalist plans. Paul, can you speak to that?
Yeah, we deal with that in Trumpocalypse. And as you said, the globalist plan is to use the media and education to brainwash people everywhere into accepting globalism and a one world government. God's order of things, revealed in Genesis 11, is independent sovereign nation states. And so America is exceptional because America is the only government, with the exception of ancient Israel. America is the only government on planet Earth which gets its laws, its freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press. All of that comes from the Bible-believing Pilgrims and Puritans who founded America. So the reason America is exceptional and different is not because we're hot stuff. It's because we have endeavored, however imperfectly, to seek the face of God. And one of the things that we try to show the reader is that God uses imperfect men. Who was the only man in the entire Bible that God called a man after his own heart? It was David, but yet David was an adulterer, a murderer, and a liar. So God uses, that's not that God's promoting those kind of activities, but I don't know any Christian leaders, I don't know any leaders, period, who could take the abuse and attack that man has taken unrelentlessly by the biggest power structures, every day under constant attack. There's something beyond human in his ability to withstand that, in my opinion.
Troy, your thoughts on the essence of what I say a pause or a breath. in this globalist march. What are your thoughts on that, or people you've interviewed? What are some of the conclusions they've drawn? Are they saying the same thing?
Yeah, so because I continue to do interviews because I'm working on other books and projects and films and such, and sort of the other things I'm hearing, like there's one minister in Las Vegas. He actually, he's a former LA gang member, and he had been working with the White House on gang reduction and gun reduction violence things. And so part of his idea is to send in ministers whenever there's like a gang violence outbreak, and it helps to sort of quell tensions. And so actually President Trump was visiting him, I think, like a week and a half before the election to give him some honors in Las Vegas. And he had the opportunity to actually anoint the president with oil and lead the president in a prayer of repentance like a week before he became president. And so we've been talking back and forth, because in the Bible, the prophets would anoint King David and different, leaders of oil, and that would, signify sort of God's anointing and blessing over that leader. And so maybe that's part of what's happened here, is that, the economy's done very well. Unemployment's, low among African Americans and Hispanics. The president has weathered all these just amazing attacks by the deep state against him, and it seems like he's got sort of God's favor. And but of course now we've had this for sort of enjoyed this time of rising prosperity and peace. We had North Korea threaten us with nuclear attack. That never happened, and Iran's still a danger. But now we're facing this election coming up, and possibly Bernie Sanders, avowed Democratic Socialists, could be the candidate to run against President Trump. So we're actually facing a situation where, possibly a socialist president in the United States could become president. And, of course, the socialists are closely aligned with, the elite and the globalist elite and even communism. I think President Trump came out, shortly before the election and made a comment like that, or short before the Super Bowl. We're living in a very, interesting time, and we just sort of watching the book Revelation unfolding.
I don't know if you're aware of this. I saw an article just yesterday. It came out that one of the things Trump, and these are the things that continue to, like I say, and I don't necessarily root for any candidate of either party. I understand, what's going on, which hand do you want to get smacked with at times, right or left. It doesn't really matter. It's going to hurt your face either way. So, in a lot of these cases. But I see a lot of things that are more encouraging to me than I've seen before out of presidents going back, 3 decades. One of the things was the number of we see the sex trafficking that's going on. He's under his presidency and administration. It's the numbers aren't even comparable. The number of people who are being convicted and caught and round up who are part of those programs. He's done more, it seems, to try to shut and put an end to those things down as possible. And then I just saw an article yesterday, as soon as yesterday, that he's formed now a 12-member team, and I can't remember exactly what they're called, of ethics, to start reviewing government funds that are being used towards anything that involves aborted fetal material or tissues. A board of ethics it's made up of politicians and theologians, both, and ethicists, that anything that gets government funding that involves aborted fetal tissues, it has to go through this ethics review. Anything that doesn't pass their muster, government funding is going to be cut from these things. Were you aware of that?
I personally wasn't aware of it to the extent I heard the early discussions, but I didn't realize the extent by which that happened. It's amazing. I mean, that's just mind-blowing.
Yeah. So I'm going to Trumpocalypse. This may or may not be in your book, but both of you guys have looked probably a lot more into this than the cursory review that the average person gets to form their opinion. What are we to make of Trump? I mean, what what are we to make of this guy? Who is he? You've mentioned that he, repented, and, perhaps anointed with oil for the position that he's taken. And people always want to bring up the past and the things he's done. When we look at where we're going, what is he? Who is he? What is this guy? Is he good for us? Is he bad for us? Or what do you guys think we should make of this guy?
Well, first, my first comment would be, and Troy may have the same reaction, or it may be different, I don't know. But, whether Trump is actually born again or he's in the process of being born again, to me is really secondary, because we had all these presidents, including one dynasty, a conservative dynasty, where all they talked about was how born again they were, Republicans. Mm-hmm. And you looked at their lives, and the funerals and stuff was about how born again they were and what great Christians they were. But you looked at the legacy. They left no legacy of being a Christian. They didn't win people to Christ. They didn't stand up for the word of God. They trampled on the word of God. So America, Trump, I believe, it's not like, well, God's on the side of the Republicans and God's not on the side of the Democrats. But the Bible says, and both of you know the scripture, God looked to and fro across the earth. He was looking for a man or a woman to stand in the gap, to stand between God and heaven and judgment and the earth. And God looked everywhere on planet Earth, even among his people, and he couldn't find one single person who would stand in the gap. And so it's like that in our time period. Right now, as people are watching your program, people all over the world are confronted with a choice. Are they going to take a stand for God, or are they going to be silent? I mean, it's really that simple. And if God's people will take a stand for God, and that's the message behind the book, God, by God's grace, whatever his imperfections are, thank God that God put somebody in office who would not back down. I mean, again, I know neither of you do this, but let's not minimize. I don't know anybody. I've never met anybody who could take the abuse, the attack from the mainstream media, from everybody, the computers, the deep state, the CIA, the FBI, everybody's spying on him, constant. And yet he's able to get out there and has a buoyancy and a tenaciousness. And what is he doing? He's standing up for Christian rights. He's standing up for the rights of Christians in China and being pro-life. And all these other presidents who were faking being public born-again Christians, all the conservative fakes, they didn't stand up for pro-life out in public and where everybody could see them, like this guy.
Yeah, absolutely right. Troy, your thoughts?
The other interesting thing that's going on here is amidst this presidency and maybe this reprieve, God's intervention and the sort of this acceleration towards these end time events is we're now starting to see signs of Acts 2. God promised to pour out his Holy Spirit in the last days on all flesh. Your sons would see visions. Your older people would see dreams, and this great outpouring of the Spirit. Millions of Christians have been praying for this revival, and we're beginning to see signs of this. I'm also a senior editor of Godspeed magazine. It's a new magazine based out of here in California. David Aikman, the former Time magazine Beijing bureau chief, is the editor-in-chief. And we're starting to chronicle some of this, signs of revival. And of course, you've got, gigantic revivals going on in Asia. China's the biggest revival in history happening, Africa, South America. But now there's beginning to be signs of sort of pockets of it here in America and even in Europe. And there's more talk about this and articles coming now. We've posted some of those. So is it possible that, part of the reason why, God intervened, we have President Trump, is to give us extra time to fulfill the Great Commission? I just wrote an article about there's now 1,600 ministries, everything from American Bible Society, Wycliffe, Faith Comes by Hearing, Saddleback Church, the Jesus Film Project, just sort of like a who's who of ministries are joined together to help fulfill the Great Commission by 2033. They're translating the Bible into the last languages on earth. They're sending missionaries, usually native missionaries, into like the Amazon jungles where you've got the last unreached people groups. Into Chinese are moving into the Chinese Christians are going to the Middle East to spread the gospel where it's restricted, and so they think that they're going to possibly pull this off by 2033. And Jesus said the gospel will preach to the whole world, and then the end will come in Matthew. And so we're somewhere in the ballpark of all this stuff that Jesus has said would happen coming down. And it seems like that, God gives us this reprieve, this extra time to give Christians, primarily here in the West and throughout the world, time to, fulfill their primary mission, which is to spread the gospel to all the world. So I think it all sort of fits together.
You, Paul, mentioned that one of the things that you hope your readers will discover after reading Trumpocalypse, still struggling to say that, by the way, Trumpocalypse, is that firsthand credible sources and documentation regarding the mainstream historical and undisputed evidence of history of what is today termed the deep state. It was vogue and trendy to use the words Illuminati and Freemasonry. But can you speak more to that point about that documentation and of what has brought about this current situation we found ourselves in with President Trump now sitting in that office?
Well, I think whether you want to call it a shadow government or a deep state or whatever, I think these unrelentless attacks against Trump and his administration look like they're orchestrated by somebody. And you keep having these high level people in certain police and intelligence agencies, and they're breaking all kinds of rules and making up all kinds of stuff. And so it's like the question has to be raised: is there a deep state? It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but we document these questions, and the reality is that the international banking families who control to a large degree our media and our nation, they have created a system where they control primarily whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. And the challenge is for God's people not to be seduced into looking at it like it's a football game between two opposing teams. Our job is to bring the truth of the gospel, the truth spiritually, the truth regarding economics. For example, in the Bible, God blesses home ownership. It's a good thing. If a person was blessed by God, they had a home or a tent or something, a dwelling, some land. God's plan for mankind was never public housing. I'm not knocking it if that's what you have to receive. But if we're crying out loud, we're not supposed to live in the Tower of Babel or Babylon. We're citizens of the kingdom of heaven.
Troy, same question to you regarding this deep state or apocalypse and the documentation you guys have uncovered. What did you find that stood out to you in regards to this? What is we see going on today in tracing that history?
This is something we tried to do in the Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse is compile all the best evidence, the most credible interviews, the most credible people and sources, the most credible, mainstream media documentation, government reports, academic reports. I mean, for these two books, I read hundreds and hundreds of books, went through literally tens of thousands of pages of, different kind of reports and articles. And
I can't imagine.
And tried to compile all the best stuff. Is this really true? That was part of the idea behind these books. And so far we've gotten hundreds of 5-star reviews and all the different book review sites, and nobody's ever contested. Anything we put together, it's all deeply footnoted with all kinds of credible sources in the back. And so I think the conclusion is that almost everybody that reads these books comes to is that, yes, this is the sort of the hidden history of humanity. This has been going on since ancient Babylon, where these secret societies emerged. They just sort of passed down this secret occult knowledge over thousands of years, and this is sort of the control power structure of our world. And now it's coming out more and more lately, but many of our leaders in the past have been involved in these secret societies, the Freemasons, even the Illuminati, Skull and Bones. You've got the Bilderberg Group conferences where the elite come together, and essentially, as far as we know, sounds like they plan the policies for the entire planet. The United Nations plays a big role in all this. The Council on Foreign
Trilateral
Relations,
Commission,
Trilateral Commission, and if you just sort of compile the quotes from these leaders themselves, which we do in the Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse, they admit to all this stuff. They admit that what they want to do is create a world socialist government, and lo and behold, we now have a socialist candidate running for president of the United States. And essentially, if they can merge America into this socialist world system they want to create, it'll take down the entire planet. So this upcoming election, just many conservatives think that Trump's going to easily sail into re-election here. I just don't see that. I see that there's a great battle, especially a gigantic, massive spiritual battle going on in the background. And literally, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the fate of humanity hangs in the balance, and we're watching this all unfold now. So in these books, we try to, compile the best evidence, and is this really happening? And, in the past, the academia and the media would criticize any kind of journalist that dug into this stuff. They say, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. But
you're actually jumping right into what was going to be my next question.
Okay.
How do you respond to somebody who says that what you're talking about and these things are conspiracy theory? What's your responses to that? I'll let you go first, and then you can answer, Paul.
Yeah. One of the most interesting things is, as I was doing research for Trumpocalypse, I found a professor in Florida. I think it's Florida State University. He wrote a book on this topic. I forget the title, but it's in Trumpocalypse. And in this book, this professor, a political science professor, says that the CIA created the term conspiracy theory in the 1960s to discourage journalists like myself from investigating this kind of stuff. In other words, from investigating the elite. And
it's counterintelligence.
It's
counterintelligence. Yeah.
So it's like a psyop. It's like a meme that they spread through culture back in the 60s, shortly after Kennedy's assassination. And now it's a catch-all phrase, and it's been used to like peer pressure. Like, if you know that your peers aren't going to, talk about something or do something, then you feel like a pressure not to look into that. So in order to dig into these things, I had to take a gigantic risk, as a mainstream journalist. Still am, but I worked in LA Daily News and different newspapers for 20 years, and I remember I read Jim Mars. He wrote a book called Ruled by Secrecy. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He used to be a investigative journalist at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. We were comparing notes, and he was telling me that the CIA has interest in most of the mainstream media newspapers around the country. He discovered that when he was a reporter back in the 80s or 90s. And I told him that, I read his book, Ruled by Secrecy, and in 2000, and I went to my editor at the LA Daily News, and I said, yeah, you got to check out this book. It's all this incredible stuff in here. And I mentioned a little bit about it to her, and she goes, shh, we don't talk about that kind of stuff around here. So that, there's sort of like this unspoken rule in the media that you just don't, delve into these things. And if you do, it's at your own peril.
Paul, go ahead. Same question. What's your response when people say these things are a conspiracy theory?
Well, over the years, because I've been doing this forever, decades and decades, and I have long passed the point where I don't care if somebody thinks I'm a conspiracy theorist. It means nothing to me. Not even nothing. But if people are obnoxious and they'll persist about calling me a conspiracy theorist, then I will debate them and I'll put them on the spot. And I'll open with a statement like, well, just out of curiosity, how long have you spent researching this subject? And of course, they'll lie. Christians will lie notoriously. And they'll say, oh, I read, probably 50 books or something over a couple of years. And then I'll peel back the layers, and they'll have to admit publicly that they didn't spend more than 60 seconds reading or researching on this topic. And I do that to humiliate, shame, and cause laughter in certain environments, because we can't allow ourselves to be defined by people who are ignorant and know nothing about the subject as conspiracy theorists. So to me, that's unacceptable. If other people can complain about being spoken to in disparaging ways in our culture, Christians need to stand up for the integrity of being a Christian. And we can't allow people to marginalize us and attempt to silence our voice by calling us extremists or conspiracy theorists, especially when the facts are on our side. I mean, that's
Right.
the worst part of all.
So, where do we start in and this isn't a question necessarily straight from the book, but just in listening to both of you gentlemen here, how do we? Obviously, your book is to start. What are some other good places or other things that you recommend to uncover the truths and the facts regarding some of the things that you uncover in the Trumpocalypse and provide evidences for? Are there other materials out there that either of you have found that are providing good, factual, solid information along the same lines as you have written here?
Well, there are, but a great danger when you go into this kind of research is there is a disturbingly high percentage of wacky, crazy, not credible conspiracy theorists or people who just make up stuff or could be working for some government agency. So you have to really learn how to be discerning. You have to really learn how to turn up your perception and kind of sense whether somebody's a flake and making stuff up or whatever, or somebody's really done their homework and what they're saying is biblical. You can't just accept everything. And
is there a person where that you've come to trust the information as being credible as coming from any other particular?
Yeah. Well, I have a list in my head of people. Doesn't mean I'll agree with everything they say, but they're kind of like people that are trustworthy. One would be my spiritual mentor, Jack Hayford. I know that on most topics he's going to be biblically correct. My friendship with Chuck Misler, he would be practical, businesslike, and biblically correct. So, but there's a lot of people, and I don't want to name their names, that the alarm bells go off, which I don't think they have integrity, and I think that what they're saying is rather odd. There is a persona all over the internet, and the persona is somebody that we're not supposed to know who it is, and it consists of one letter of the alphabet. Okay, you all know what I'm talking about. And everybody's following this guy, or if this guy is really a team in several nations. And somebody sent me an email yesterday, and what this particular letter in the alphabet said was practically word for word from my book and word for word from a talk that I got. And I've heard that people are going to our books like Trumpocalypse and the Babylon Code and my books that I write by myself. They're looking at them, and some of these entities, let's just call them entities because we don't know who they really are. They're using our research as a basis for formulating counterfeit information by trying to look like you're trustworthy. So your question on who's trustworthy or not, that is so important. And there's perceptions you can develop. First of all, one of the biggest characteristics of bloggers, spokespeople, experts on the internet, one of the biggest signals that somebody is not for real or disinformation agent is that when you look up their bio or look up about them, they have almost no personal history or public history. It's very sketchy or it's blank. You can go back and find 40 years of video of me on the internet. Okay. People know me. I was in different places, but you got thousands and thousands of people on the internet. Some are actual people, but they've come out of nowhere. They didn't have a start. They didn't hang out with this group. They didn't learn this. They've come out of nowhere, and now they're operating some Christian conspiracy website. But who are they? Nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows somebody who talked to them. They're these mysterious entities that didn't exist 2 years ago. People need to be very, very suspicious about that. And then you have what's called computer-generated websites, like fake conspiracy sites, fake prophecy sites. And you'll hop on a search engine, which is rigged, and you'll see that different prophecy sites sound almost identical, use the same art. And then they will mirror, they'll take like your website, Troy's website, my website, or whoever, and almost repeat the same thing and steal the hits. So there's a vicious war going on between ideas, and the other side is raising up many counterfeit voices that appear to be conservative, appear to be Christians, appear to be biblical, but in reality are secretly agents of disinformation. I know that sounds conspiratorial, but that's just the way it is.
That's fine. I agree with and have become aware of a lot of the same things you are. So to hear you say that helps folks like myself know they're not insane. To have other people of like mind come to the same conclusions is a good feeling. I'll ask you that same question. Are there people that you have found through your research and your time that you have looked to often or call upon or feel are trustworthy people? And do you feel like mentioning them or people that you would want you to say these are credible, Troy? Or
okay. There's very few for me that I'd want to name publicly, only because I would feel very, very bad that I neglected to name somebody who was equally credible. You know what I'm saying?
No, I understand.
It's just weird. But there are
question. Are there other people you recommend reading, I guess, to those who would watch it?
Well, I'll tell you, with Troy, and it sounds kind of incestuous to say this, but I trust Troy's research because I know his documentation is solid. I've checked up on him. Okay. It's always accurate. So that's what I'm looking for. So if let's say Troy, hypothetically, I don't think he did, but let's say he wrote an article on UFOs, I would know he's not off on some weird trip in his head because he does his homework and he documents it from sources. When people don't document or people don't have a personal history, hey, if you're following somebody who doesn't have any history or background going back further than a year or two, and their only education was at, somewhere in the Washington, D.C. area. I mean, come on. Who do you think you're talking to? You're talking to the deep state.
But I'll let you answer that, Troy, if you have anybody in mind, or
I just
way you would want to answer that.
Since this is a fundraiser for Josh and Christina, Skywatch TV does a great job. We're friends of Derek Gilbert and Josh and Christina and Dr. Tom Horn. So they do all kinds of great work. I've read most of Dr. Horn's books. Paul's books are amazing books. I met him about a decade ago. I was covering a conference at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. I managed to talk to my editor at the LA Daily News and covering this Bible prophecy conference. And so I get there, and there's like several thousand people there. Dr. Tim LaHaye's there, David Hawking, Paul McGuire, and I hear Paul say, the world is undergoing the greatest transformation since the Tower of Babel, a coming global government, cashless society, and universal religion. And when he said that back in 2009, it just struck me, my God, if this is true, this is a gigantic story. And so I introduced myself to him, and he gave me a copy of his book, The Day the Dollar Died. And I remember I read that like a couple of days and just blown away. So that's a great book to sort of give you an introduction to this. And there's quite a few books out there, but those are just some that come to mind right off the top of my head.
while we're kind of topic and what you said both now with mentioning the book, but mentioning before we came on, we were talking about the Tower of Babel. And I'm not going to tell you guys where I got this, but it's a family member who served in the military, was in the Iraq during the time of the pullout, served at the joint branches. This is where it was the joint base, joint forward operating base, I think is the official term, JFOB, there when they were back closing down Iraq and the mission over there from the last war. And my family member was asked by this general if he wanted to take part in designing with him a military coin to give those who were serving there. And my family member is not really an artistic kind of person. He's like, I mean, thank you, but I'm really not the guy to help you with this. But he came back to him, and it was amazing how quick he came back with an actual finished product of the coin they gave all ranking members or people who served directly under the ranking members there during that time of the closing of the joint forward operating base. My family member actually stayed in one of the palaces, one of the palaces there that he was in. But he came back and he handed him this coin, and you guys are going to be intrigued by this right away because of the shape of it. But it has all five of the or six of the branches, five of the military branches on there, and it says nos planto is venio, which in Latin translates "together we build it." Together we build it.
That's the warning in Genesis 11. They were together. Right. They would build it.
Yeah. Now look at the back of this coin.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
So the Tower of Babylon in the shape of an unformed, unfinished pyramid of the whole coin.
So
this was an official military issued coin for the joint forward operating base there as they were backing out of there at that time. And it says the cradle of civilization on here.
The pyramid structure is the coin?
The coin is an unfinished pyramid.
Wow. That's incredible.
Has the tower, and it says right there on there, the tower says the cradle of civilization, forward operating base, Union 3, Tower of Babylon, Baghdad, Iraq, across the bottom side there. But this military coin that he was issued, I thought you guys would find that fascinating.
It is fascinating. It's fascinating. There's probably your whole story behind it.
Oh, yeah, but it's just addressing. You mentioned the Tower of Babylon there just twice in referencing these things, and it just triggered that thought in my memory. Well, here's another little piece of hard evidence issued from the military there.
Directly from the deep state.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So you talked about this at the little beginning, and we don't have a whole lot of time left here. We're about 47 minutes in, so I'll give each of you a chance to kind of respond to this. But the stock market hitting record highs, unemployment you had mentioned, the economy is doing quite well. I wouldn't say it's vigorous by any means, but at least it's not what we saw under some previous presidencies where it was bleak, and it seemed to be getting more bleak with failed insurance programs, with insurance for everybody. So a lot of people thought about the economy might crash as soon as President Trump was elected. The globalist elite have been and still are trying to plan this reset. They would love nothing more to bring to their credo forth order out of chaos, right? So what do you guys see on the horizon for this in another election coming up? Do you see this again as potential of a reset down the road?
Well,
I'll let you answer first, Paul, and then you can answer, Troy.
The thing is that the globalists, not all of them, but the majority of them hate Trump. They hate nationalism. They hate Christianity. They hate the whole "Make America Great Again" thing. And so Trump is the enemy of the globalists. And the globalists also are the secular humanists, the people who believe that there is no God, but man is God, that we're all evolving into God. So there's this clash between these two viewpoints of reality. One is there are people who believe we're created in the image of God, like Christians and Jews. And then there are large numbers of people that believe that life is totally random, chance, accidental. We got here by accident, and there's no reason for our living, and that we are gods, and we will create our godhood through some kind of transhumanism or whatever. And that's a spooky philosophy to embrace, because that's like that episodic TV that I don't recommend called Westworld, where soulless, lifelike robots would just carry out the most sadistic impulses, and nobody felt anything, you know.
What about you, Troy? As far as the global reset, and do you see that something that is imminent or on the horizon? Should Trump or get in or not get into office? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have a chapter in Trumpocalypse called "The Economic Reset," where we explore this. The elite, the IMF, Christine Lagarde, she's made a couple of speeches, I think, at the National Press Club a few years back and some other places, talking about this reset of the economy. And there's different financial experts who have talked about, could we move away from the dollar, the petrodollar, move into SDRs or some kind of new global currency. And, of course, the world's debts are astronomical. America doesn't just have a $22 trillion federal debt. We also have another 120 trillion or so in, Social Security, Medicare, unfunded public pensions, and that doesn't include corporate debt and private debt. And it's the same picture throughout the entire world. The governments all have record levels of debt. I think Harvard came out a couple of years ago and tried to estimate the debts, and it's like something like 1.5 quadrillion. It's just like some gigantic number you can't even get your head around. And so we've created this massive financial house of cards. And so the question is how we've been enjoying this decade long recovery from the last big the Great Recession, but how long can this go on? And then you've got the outbreak of the coronavirus in China, and now spreading throughout the world. And China is one of the biggest economies on the planet, and it's yet to be seen what kind of economic impact this is going to have. I mean, could this potentially be some kind of strategy by the elite to crash the global economy before the election, when that would certainly hurt President Trump's chances of re-election? So there's all kinds of different dynamics going on here. Ultimately, I believe God's in control, and his purposes will move forward, regardless of whether those are for a continued economic expansion or what will happen here. But there's certainly a danger that we could experience some kind of economic calamity in the near future. It seems like this expansion has gone on far longer than seems logical, and there's all kinds of different dynamics unfolding now.
Well, we've barely been able to scratch the surface of everything that you guys discussed in the book, but I'll just put that on the screen here again for everybody here. Let's show it right there. The book is called Trumpocalypse, The End Times President, A Battle Against the Globalist Elite and a Countdown to Armageddon. Our guests today have been Paul McGuire and Troy Anderson. They wrote a previous book called The Babylon Code, which may trigger some spark of memory in your guys' minds. This was the book that have been written together. Each of them have written tons of material, both individually, other books, articles, right? You can find their information anywhere. Just simply type in their names on the internet, in even Google. So far, you will find them. If you cannot find them, you aren't trying very hard, or even incorrect spellings can sometimes bring them up. But this whole effort has been a goal, again, as stated at the outset. We're raising money for Josh and Christina. Their son, diagnosed a year ago Nathan with leukemia. As you guys might understand, the financial burdens that's come upon them, I'm sure, is quite great. If a body of believers involved with so many other things can take a time out of our day and come together to do what we've been called to do, love one another. He says, they will know you are my disciples if you do this one thing, if you love one another. We have got to love one another, and this is a small way we can do that. Sharing their burden, go to thedailyrenegade.com, find the donate button, donate directly. If you want to remain anonymous, I believe there is a way to do that. You can do that through the GoFundMe link you will find below. But I just want to thank you guys once again for taking time out of your day, joining with us in this endeavor, sharing information from your book. People can find it on Amazon, of course, as well, and it's their website. I ask my audience and Josh's audience, take a chance to go get this book, read it, be informed, and be better prepared to understand and answer questions and to make decisions. This is Chad. I am the host of Disputed Lands. This has been Take on the World TV. And until we see the next time, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being here.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite.